This is a lifeboat. It hasn't touched water in over 70 years. It was found in the back of a collapsing barn, under decades of hay dust and pigeon droppings, half forgotten by the family who owned the land. But when we pulled back the tarp, we found something we weren't expecting. Names, carved into the wood, by hand, probably with a pocketknife. Someone sat in this boat, terrified, and carved their name so that if they didn't survive, someone would know they were here. Today, we're going to restore this lifeboat plank by plank, and we're going to try to find out who these men were. Because somewhere, there might be a family who has no idea this boat, or these names, still exist. The call came in from a farmer 2 counties over. He said his grandfather had an old boat in the back barn, and the barn was finally coming down, and did we want it before the demolition crew turned it into firewood? We get calls like this more than you'd think. Most of the time it's a rotted rowboat or a fiberglass dinghy not worth the diesel to go pick up. We almost said no. We're glad we didn't. When we pulled the barn doors open, the smell hit first. Dust, old hay, and underneath it, something else. Tar, salt. The unmistakable smell of a boat that had once lived at sea. It was sitting up on blocks, listing slightly, half buried under decades of stored junk. 16 feet of clinker-built wood construction, double-ended, with the unmistakable silhouette of a ship's lifeboat. Davits brackets still bolted to either side of the hull, or locks, rusted solid, still in place. This wasn't a leisure boat. This was a working lifeboat, the kind that hung off the side of a merchant vessel or a troop ship, waiting for the day it might be needed. We started clearing the debris. Old farm tools, a collapsed hay rack, pigeon nests built into the bow, generations of them, layered like sediment. And then, scraping moss off the inside of the gunnel, one of our crew stopped. You need to see this. Carved into the wood, weathered but unmistakably deliberate, was a name. Then another, a few feet away. Then a third, smaller, almost hidden near a seat brace. Not graffiti, not vandalism. These were carved with care. Straight lines, block letters. The kind of carving someone does when they have time and fear and not much else. We didn't know it yet, but we just found a time capsule. Why was this lifeboat abandoned in a barn instead of scrapped like every other lifeboat from its era? And who were the men who carved their names into it? That's what we set out to find out. Before we could touch a single tool, we needed to understand what we were looking at. The hull construction told us a lot. Clinker-built, meaning the planks overlap rather than sit flush, a traditional technique for small craft built for durability over speed. The wood was likely oak frames with pine or larch planking, standard for lifeboats built in the early to mid-20th century. We found a faint stencil near the stern, mostly worn away, but under raking light we could make out part of a serial number and what looked like a shipping line's house flag motif. That was our first real thread. Lifeboats like this were standard equipment on merchant ships and troop transports through both world wars. They weren't decorative. They were the last line of defense between a sinking ship and open water. Every lifeboat on a vessel was numbered, logged, and assigned to a muster station, a specific spot on deck where specific crew or passengers were meant to gather in an emergency. If this boat came off a real ship, that meant there would be records, maritime registries, crew manifests, possibly even survivor accounts. We sent photos of the stencil and the hull markings to a maritime archivist we work with, along with close-up images of the carved names. While we waited to hear back, we kept digging into the boat itself. The names, 3 of them, carved at different depths and in different hands, which told us they likely weren't carved at the same moment. One was bold and confident. Another was shaky, shallow, like it was carved in a hurry or carved by someone exhausted. The third was almost ornamental, with serif-style lettering, like someone who'd taken real pride in the work. We started to wonder if these weren't names carved during the chaos of an actual evacuation, but during the long, boring stretches of lifeboat drills. Ships' crews and passengers, especially on long wartime convoys, ran drills constantly. Lifeboats sat on deck for hours during these drills. Plenty of idle time for someone to pull out a knife. That theory got more interesting when our archivist got back to us. The serial fragment matched a registry of lifeboats issued to a mid-sized merchant vessel that had served in convoy duty during the Second World War, ferrying supplies across the Atlantic. The ship itself survived the war, which meant this lifeboat almost certainly never saw an actual emergency. It was decommissioned along with the rest of the ship's small craft sometime after the war, sold off as surplus, and from there the trail went cold, until decades later it turned up on a farm, repurposed as not much more than storage, then forgotten. That explained why it survived. Lifeboats that get used in disasters often get destroyed, lost, or are too damaged to keep. This one survived because nothing ever happened to it. It just sat, waiting for a moment that, thankfully, never came for that ship. But the name still nagged at us. If nothing dramatic happened, why carve your name into a lifeboat at all? We think the answer is simpler and somehow more human. A long war, long convoys, young men, some barely out of their teens, sitting in a boat during drill after drill, watching the gray Atlantic roll by, wondering if today might be the day this boat actually mattered. Carving your name wasn't about the boat. It was about being remembered, just in case. We couldn't trace the individual names to specific service records with full certainty. Wartime merchant marine documentation is fragmented, and common names make it difficult without more to go on. But we're including close-up footage of the carvings in this video, and if any of you watching recognize a name or a family story about a relative who served on Atlantic convoys, we want to hear from you. This boat might still have a family out there who doesn't know it exists. Understanding the history changed how we approached the restoration. This wasn't going to be a strip it down and rebuild everything project. The names meant we had to restore around them, preserve them, treat this lifeboat less like a derelict hull and more like an artifact. Step 1. Stabilization. The hull had taken on a twist from decades of uneven weight on the barn blocks. Before we could do any serious structural work, we needed to support it properly and let it begin relaxing back toward its original shape. We built a custom cradle, padded, adjustable, designed to support the hull evenly along its length without putting stress on any one point. Step 2. Cleaning. This is where things got delicate. Decades of pigeon nesting material, hay dust, and grime had to come off, but aggressive cleaning methods would have damaged the carved names along with the dirt. We hand-cleaned every interior surface with soft brushes and gentle solvents, working around the carvings with cotton swabs and a magnifying lamp instead of anything mechanical. It took 4 full days just to clean the interior. Several planks near the bow had rotted through, a combination of old water damage and decades of barn humidity. Clinker-built repair is unforgiving. Each plank overlaps the next, so replacing one means carefully working around its neighbors without disturbing the overlap seams. We sourced matching larch for the replacement planks, steamed them to get the curve needed for the hull's shape, and fitted them using traditional copper rivets to match the original construction. No modern fasteners, no shortcuts. If this boat was going to tell an honest story, it needed honest repairs. The garboard plank, the one closest to the keel, was the worst of it. Years of standing water inside the hull had rotted nearly 1/3 of its length. That repair alone took the better part of a week. Fitting, test fitting, steaming, refitting, until the new would sat exactly where the old would had been. Step 4. The keel and structural frames. Several oak frames were cracked, likely from the stress of being stored improperly for so long. We didn't replace these. We sistered new oak alongside the originals, reinforcing without erasing the boat's original bones. Step 5. Hardware. The oar locks and davit brackets were frozen solid with rust. We removed each one individually, soaked them in a slow electrolytic rust removal bath, and restored the original metal rather than replacing it with reproductions. Every piece you see in this boat by the end is either original material or a faithful, traditionally fitted repair. About 3 weeks in, we discovered a problem we hadn't seen during the initial inspection. A section of the stern, hidden under a thwart brace, had old insect damage that had compromised more structural wood than we initially planned for. It meant reworking part of our repair plan and sourcing more matching timber than budgeted. It also meant slowing down right when we wanted to speed up. But rushing a boat like this isn't an option. Every repair had to respect what was already there, including the names, which sit just inches from some of the most heavily damaged sections. Step 6. Finishing. We treated the hull with traditional linseed oil-based preservatives rather than modern marine varnish, partly for authenticity, partly because it allows the wood to breathe in a way sealed finishes don't, which matters for a boat that's going to live on display rather than back in the water. The carved names were left completely untouched, no varnish, no treatment, exactly as they were found. We didn't want to do anything that might be seen as erasing or even subtly altering them. When we finally rolled the lifeboat out of the workshop and into daylight, it didn't look like the wreck that came out of that barn. The hull lines were clean. The wood had color again, warm honey tones where there had been gray rot. The hardware gleamed dull bronze instead of rust orange, but the names were still there, exactly where they'd always been. We ran our hands over them one more time before calling it finished. The same 3 names, carved by 3 different people at 3 different moments, for reasons we'll never know for certain. This lifeboat will never go back to sea. That's not the point. It's going on display, with a small placard explaining what we found and what we know. If even one descendant of one of those 3 names ever sees this boat and recognizes a piece of their family's history, this entire project will have been worth it. That's what this restoration was really about. Not rebuilding a boat, preserving a memory that almost ended up as scrap wood and firewood. Somewhere out there, someone might be looking for exactly this. If that's you, reach out. We'd love to help close that circle.